Okay, I think it's time to get started. Thanks everyone for coming. So, let me see. This isn't extensively prepared. I need your help to make this informative and entertaining. So I'll provide some prompts and then I hope we can discuss them. But I'll make some remarks here at the beginning, and I have some quotes up on the board, as you can see, which hopefully might be inspiring. So it's becoming clearer and clearer that we're at the beginning of a period of dramatic change, and that has multiple causes, some of them technological and some of them not. And while none of us can say how that's going to go, or how precisely we will arrange our lives on the other side, we know it's going to be different, and perhaps in profound ways. So one day you might wake up and find yourself a revolutionary on some front. It might be in education, it might be in locking up the AI researchers and throwing away the key to stop the apocalypse. Who knows, right? So maybe not you, but somebody you know might be in a position like that. And then what? You're not going to have time for philosophical chit-chat then, are you? So, you may find yourself in a position to reshape the world, and it's going to be too late to have polite chats then. So, let's have some chit-chat now. And on the particular topic of education. So, let's see. I'll start with the first quote, I think. So I don't know if you've read or know of Ivan Illich. This is a notorious, famous book, Deschooling Society. Let me find the quote here. There's many quotable bits from this book, but I'll just read one. Schools are designed on the assumption that there is a secret to everything in life, that the quality of life depends on knowing that secret. That secrets can be known only in orderly successions, and that only teachers can properly reveal these secrets. An individual with a schooled mind conceives of the world as a pyramid of classified packages, accessible only to those who carry the proper tags. New educational institutions would break apart this pyramid. Their purposes must be to facilitate access for the learner, to allow him to look into the windows of the control room or the parliament if he cannot get in by the door. Moreover, such new institutions should be channels to which the learner would have access without credentials or pedigree, public spaces in which peers and elders outside his immediate horizon would become available. So Illich was writing that in 1973. Obviously, part of that has come true, right? YouTube, Khan Academy certainly count as channels to which the learner would have access without credentials or pedigree. And as someone homeschooling a 6-year-old child, I can tell you what a profound impact the availability of that kind of material has had on education for children. And all of you have looked at MIT OpenCourseWare or learned something from YouTube, I'm sure. So you're aware of how profoundly technology has shifted us in the direction of this vision already. The last bit, not so much, right? Public spaces in which peers and elders outside his immediate horizon would become available. You don't find peers and elders inside YouTube.
So we have metauni?
Yeah, that's right, or things like this. So I wanted to draw your attention to this cartoon on the bottom. This is an interaction that I have routinely with students at university. Many of you either teach at universities or maybe one day will teach there, and you'll have this experience as well, maybe not with this exact wording. So I had a student in my calculus class in second semester last year who came up to me after the third or the fourth lecture and confessed might be the right word, not in the sense that he'd done anything wrong, but in the sense of a Christian confession, sharing your soul with somebody. So he came up and he confessed that he had been doing a commerce degree, and I think he was 2 or 3 years into that, and just found that he was deeply depressed, and he decided to throw it all away and start mathematics, for reasons you might imagine, I guess. And he was telling me that, well, he'd been doing math. It was a first year calculus class. I don't remember exactly how he'd been doing it for some time before he met me, but he didn't feel like he'd gotten in touch with actually what he was looking for, even though he was sitting in a math class, or had been sitting in math classes. And what got him to bring this forward was, I was kind of, as you sometimes do, I was reading the slide, which is our kind of standard Calculus 1 slide, and I kind of crossed out some garbage explanation and, substituted in something and made some comment about the bigger picture, and the students shift forward on their seats and they're kind of lapping up this kind of big picture story. And he came up afterwards and he's like, yeah, this is what I want, right? But he's going to get it from me in that calculus class, like every 5th lecture when I sneak it in the side door, But that's what he came to university for, right? Now, he didn't say he wanted to learn the language of God, but you know what I'm referring to when I say that, I think. He's sort of looking for some connection to the transcendent in the knowledge and in the practice of learning the knowledge and engaging with people who are deeply passionate about it. And I think what I'm mostly delivering to him is the option between these 2 doors over here on the right. And that's not what we go into education for, really. And it's not that I'm making a deep critique of the university. I understand why it is the way it is. But the point that I want to circle around through this entire discussion is, while I understand why universities are that way, why schools are that way, it's a set of compromises and solutions to how to organize resources and people and talent, and that's fine. But that equilibrium is either already broken or about to break. And that means we have to rethink how we put these pieces together. And I'm just pointing to some of the ways in which they don't fit already, and the fault lines along which they might break. Okay, so that's my first little vignette. Anybody want to comment or take the discussion in some other direction before I move on to the second quote?
Someone said, and you said, or things like it. But what things are like it?
Oh, I don't know anything right now that's like this, but this will not be the only thing of this kind, I presume, right?
I see. You were talking not necessarily in the present.
Yeah, I mean... let me think. I mean, there must be... Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Something else to observe. It's surprising that we haven't seen more disruption here yet. Like, I grew up with Khan Academy, right? I remember in 2nd grade being sick for like a week at home, watching enough Khan Academy that I could go back and skip a grade. And it was supposed to be something that could come with me throughout my life. And then, I don't know, they got some college board SAT prep, and it's gotten... it isn't where it should be. And I don't know, it constantly surprises me that we haven't seen more.
Could you expand on that? What did you imagine it was going to be, and how is it different?
Well, okay, so we have metauni, great, but going this deep, like there's less of that content than I expected
Yeah.
there to be. There are obviously courses online, um, but there hasn't been the kind of exploration with the medium and the kinds of gathering experiences that I would have thought there would have been by 2022 or 23.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Let me just say the first explanatory factor that comes to mind and see what you think. So, obviously, it requires some talent, dedication, knowledge, and insight to organize something like this. And there's just many other more productive, well, not more productive, but many other more rewarding things you can go and do. So I suppose Khan Academy, in a sense, is a kind of miracle like Wikipedia, where you could imagine all the people who were contributing to Khan Academy could probably find other things that gave them more money. They chose to do that, and that's amazing, and I'm really grateful they did. Do you think it's to do with... Do you think that's the reason that more experiments in these kinds of directions haven't happened? I mean, we do have Wikipedia, we do have Khan Academy, many thousands of people contribute to the former. I don't know, actually, how much there is of the latter, how many people are involved.
Well, so I recently spoke to an early Khan Academy employee, and I got the impression that the Khan Academy we have today is not the vision that Saul Khan had originally. Like, he had a vision, we're going to pretty much get rid of universities and go micro-credentials all the way. And the vested interests, the colleges, somewhat stop this. Or maybe that's a too conspiratorial thought. But in any case, they got sidetracked by working with the College Board, working with APs and SAT.
Yeah, it seems like there's... So one of the later quotes will be relevant to this, but it seems like there's a pretty fundamental divergence between... Okay, so some of the values that are in this place and that presumably are why you were drawn here, they're kind of orthogonal to credentialism, right? So what we mean by universities today is basically they're institutions for producing degrees and credentials, and maybe we wish they were different, but that is what they are, and that's a useful thing to do. You could disagree with it, but so maybe it's very difficult to integrate those things, I think, right? So I would be very much against there ever being a meta-uni credential of any kind. I think it's the incentives... Like, you can just see it in the universities, right? The incentives around being the credentialing institutions, they're just absolutely impossible to resist. You cannot stand in the way of that incentive structure. So I guess maybe Khan Academy is somewhat a victim of that as well. And maybe they should have been much stronger in the opposite direction at the beginning, and they might have survived. I mean, it's still incredibly valuable, I would say, but... Any other comments, or should we move on to the second quote? All right, let's move on. Okay, so this is from Bertrand Russell. I found his writing on education very formative years ago, and still do. This is from a volume of his writing called Basic Writings. There's several essays in there on the subject of education. I'll read you some quotes from two. The first one is Education. That was in 1916. I believe that's where both of these are from. Okay. Success in producing mental discipline is the chief merit of traditional higher education. I doubt whether it can be achieved except by compelling or persuading active attention to a prescribed task. It is for this reason chiefly that I do not believe methods, let's talk about Montessori, I'll just elide that. I guess he's reacting to some ideas about just pure freedom for childhood education, and that people will naturally bring themselves without any kind of outside influence to studying things deeply. Okay, let me continue a bit later in the quote. The child's attention is wholly spontaneous, as in play. It enjoys acquiring knowledge in this way and does not acquire any knowledge which it does not desire. I am convinced that this is the best method of education with young children. The actual results make it almost impossible to think otherwise. But it is difficult to see how this method can lead to control of attention by the will. Many things which must be thought about are uninteresting, and even those that are interesting at first often become very wearisome before they have been considered as long as is necessary. I think we're all familiar with that. The power of giving prolonged attention is very important, and it is hardly to be widely acquired except as a habit induced originally by outside pressure. Some few children, it is true, have sufficiently strong intellectual desires to be willing to undergo all that is necessary by their own initiative and free will. But for all others, an external inducement is required in order to make them learn any subject thoroughly. There is among educational reformers a certain fear of demanding great efforts, and in the world at large a growing unwillingness to be bored. Both these tendencies have their good side, but both also have their dangers. Yeah, I find this actually professionally difficult because I'm often in the situation where the classes which I teach that are the most valued by people and that years later people tell me change their lives are often the ones that make students pretty miserable. I don't know actually how to deliver the life-changing reorganization of your mind in a way that's comfortable the whole way through and that doesn't run the risk of making some people really sad and feel that this is where they get off the train. So I taught a class, metric and Hilbert spaces, several times. I haven't taught it for a couple of years. Some of the students around MetaUni have been through it. Some of them didn't enjoy it, I'm sure. But most of you probably remember a class like that, where you were on the borderline of feeling that, well, this is how far I go in mathematics, and maybe I'm not well suited to going any further, not because the lecturer told you that, but because you just somehow didn't feel yourself able to continue to internalize these representations in a way that would be the foundation for future thought, and that maybe you just weren't capable to continue, and you probably felt pretty unhappy that the lecturer was inducing those feelings in you. But bringing you to that point is actually a necessary prerequisite for inducing the transformation of you into a being who can absorb the next level of representations. And I don't know any way through that bottleneck except to kind of not exactly drag people to it. Some people run through that happily, but it's not an entirely voluntary, peaceful, enjoyable process. So that's what I think about when I hear this quote. Yeah, any more thoughts? Any thoughts on that?
I'm one of those people right now.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
I kind of started, bandwidth and time is a factor for me, and I started over my kind of Christmas vacation, but realized I needed to sort of bolster my sort of mathematical foundations a little bit before really going too far with that course. But I'm experienced enough, I suppose, to know that I can and will get there. I just need to persist and not panic or get too sad or whatever, and just come at it from multiple directions and be kind enough to myself to understand that I won't understand everything immediately, as quickly as I might like, but that's okay. Blah, blah, blah. Just to confess.
Yeah, thanks. How do you handle this with your children when they're going through it?
So I have an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old. The 18-year-old is in the first year of a credentialing institution, the University of British Columbia. It's difficult to say because my older one has been. I haven't seen him experience this yet. To be honest, I mean he's got a binder. He calls it his math binder of problems that he's independently thought of and solved. So he's unusual in that regard, I think, compared with his sort of classmates. And then my younger one is very independent, fiercely so. So I see sometimes like the fight, but I don't see defeat. I just see sort of fire and battle, and explosions. And I kind of stand back, and it's a sort of, I stand back in awe sometimes. But anyway, I mean, this is.
Sounds like you're.
Everyone's kids are special, aren't they?
It sounds like you're lucky.
Maybe, but I'm probably just overselling them. They're just, just like me. I mean, it's like I have more experience handling it with myself. It's like I'm completely with Russell. Sounds slightly weird. There's a third Russell.
That's right.
A 6-year-old, and now Bertrand. In terms of like young children and play-based learning, and I'm married to an early childhood educator, and we're in that zone definitely. And then he goes into no pain, no gain, essentially. But the pain, I mean, there is still. So with play-based learning, is just like you just learn what you want to learn, and you always do what you want, and you flip from this and that, and you don't sort of stick at something that's difficult because you don't want to do it because it's difficult or unpleasant or discouraging in some way. But the reason older people are able to go through that pain is the promise of gain, ultimately, I think. So it's not, and so Bertrand is saying you need a stick to force people through that, but the gain is still a carrot, if you can see it as such. Maybe he's talking about sort of adolescence, where it's you're making that transition, and it's not so easy necessarily. You need a bit of a stick, maybe, kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe it's the nature of the carrot here that feeds into the next topic as well. So I suppose there's at least maybe two big categories of carrots. One of them is success in later life depends not only on getting the credential, but being the kind of person that is able to overcome all these difficulties and has a deep understanding of X, Y, and Z. So learn X, Y, and Z and do what it takes to reshape yourself in order to do that, because the world will approve. And then there's a second category of carrot, which is closer to the request of the student on the first board here. You want to see through the veil of the mundane into the transcendent and shove as much of that good stuff into your brain as you can, and then you'll live out your days happily reciting the passages of EGA or some other favorite text. what do you think's? I mean, I find it hard to believe. I mean, certainly in myself, it had very little to do with the former, or nothing. If you look at your own children, like that fire you're describing, I doubt very much it's like 100% about I'll have a high salary one day, right? Would that be accurate? Yeah.
Yes, it's accurate. I think it's more about self-image, maybe self-esteem, sort of figuring out who you are, who you want to be in the short term.
All right. Anybody else want to comment on that before we move on to the?
It feels like Russell's missing an important thing, which is the teacher.
Yeah.
Like, I'm willing to suffer. I look up to the teacher, right? And that's a motivation already early in childhood. If you have a teacher who really motivates you. Yeah,
What do you think the teacher is doing there?
Strong motivation. I mean, we're all looking for direction, and the right teacher offers a little bit of that.
Inspiring, maybe, is what the teacher is doing. You're right. I'm missing that. I've experienced it myself with some teachers.
Maybe also if you're young enough, having the right teachers act as a kind of template.
Yeah, I think that probably remains true. If I probably only had one teacher as an undergraduate who really inspired me, and that was a mathematical physics class, and I was absolutely enraptured by that class. If I think about it, this was my third year, I think, of mathematics undergraduate. But up until that point, I think I was like this first student on the board there. Felt like I was, I don't know, training to be a lecturer rather than seeing through the veil of the universe, or in the presence of people who cared about that. But that course, that was on mathematical methods and physics and quantum groups and that kind of thing. And that was maybe the first time I felt like these things I was a bit embarrassed to say out loud, right? The kind of things that we're talking about here. Like, I would not have said out loud, oh yes, I want to shove the transcendent into my head. I would have been embarrassed to say things like that, and maybe still am. But I would not have thought that way, and wouldn't have thought it was okay to be like that. But then standing up in front of me was somebody, not who was just reading from the textbook or like had a job to lecture, and I had other competent lecturers, but actually was modeling that part of myself that I was kind of a little bit afraid to incorporate or admit as like something important to me. And that courage, I think, was, if I think back, what really inspired me about that lecturer.
For me too, Dan. One lecturer, who peeled open the transcendent, and that's enough to motivate me to choose a physics master's or a machine learning master's. So teachers make all the difference.
All right, so
my experience of
go ahead.
Inspiring a teacher was in high school, by the way, where I think I was less informed. I think we're going to move on now.
Oh, yeah, it's okay. Is that why you ended up doing physics? Because of that teacher?
No, he was a chemistry teacher.
I see.
And for a while, and it wasn't this subject. It was him. He modeled it wasn't the whole fill my head full of transcendence thing. Sorry, when I say it like that, I'm not trying to say it pejoratively at all. I'm absolutely. I mean, that's that's why I'm here, kind of. But that's that for me was a later thing, I suppose, in life, like a university thing. And it was more, I was just trying to figure out what kind of person to be in my teens, as I think most of us are. And I was inspired by this teacher in a general, I mean, he was clever and taught well, and I enjoyed the subject very much and his style of teaching. But he also was sort of socially aware, ethically. Like he just brought a lot into the classroom beyond the subject.
Cool. All right, so my next board is a picture. So this is a picture of reward hacking. It's actually a connection that was suggested by one of these bots in one of my conversations was institutional design and AI alignment, which I guess is a pretty obvious connection that I hadn't thought properly about. But so we were just talking about credentialing and the maybe over pursuit of purpose in an institution of higher learning to sort of be about delivering credentials and proving capabilities in a given task and so on. And it's interesting to consider the difference between how incentives behave when the rewards or the incentive structure that sort of is associated to rewards are sort of comprehensible versus incomprehensible. And so this is related to another observation which I have at the top of the board here, which people in deep learning have made over and over again in various ways, which is that harder tasks often lead to deeper representations. It's not unrelated to what we were just discussing about Russell's quote and the transformations people undergo in my class, my hard class, and other classes like it. So people notice that if you train a neural network on easy tasks, it will do the cheapest thing, right? It will develop shallow representations just enough to solve that task. And maybe that's not actually what you want. And you'll think that it's maybe cheating sometimes and kind of taking a shortcut. But if you give it a very hard task, like modeling Common Crawl plus books 1, 2, and 3, and whatever else GPT-3 is trained on, well, that's such a hard task that the only way to fit it will be to develop deeper representations. And you can see this, so in the context of deep reinforcement learning training, the idea that if you have a goal that's easy enough that you can find some, well, yeah, maybe this connection is doesn't have to be easy. So let me just state this is not directly the same thing. So another related observation is what's called reward hacking. So reward hacking is where you give an agent some reward for performing a task. Perhaps the task is to go and fetch a, what's a good example? Well, I'll give a stupid example and somebody can give a better one. Suppose the task is to get a certain score in a game, right? So the reward is the score. But the agent notices by interacting with the game that there's some glitch that allows it to get a high score, or it notices that actually what you're you're giving it points for getting a high score, but also points for finishing the episode early, because you don't want it to spend a lot of time just moving backwards and forwards, so you kind of encourage it to finish the episode early, or you punish it for taking too long, and therefore it notices that if it just commits suicide very quickly, it will actually get a relatively high reward. Okay, so the way in which the agent adapts to the reward structure might be to kind of hack its way towards high reward, and you can see some examples at the bottom of this mountain here. So you're setting up some task. It's supposed to be, for example, learning calculus. That's your North Star here. So one way, so how am I going to get you to learn calculus? Well, I'm going to put slides with calculus-y words on them in front of you, and then I'm going to test you in assignments and an exam. And that should induce you to go up this mountain over here on the right-hand side and be the person who understands calculus. But we know that isn't always what happens. Instead, you might try and jump on the red chair, which is a meta-uni law thing, and just go straight up to the star. Or you might try some other kind of shortcut. You'll cheat on your assignment, you'll cheat on the exam. Now that's partly to do with the structure we put in place to induce you to learn it. And you could say, well, replace it by a more meaningful kind of evaluation. And it's interesting to just notice that somehow making the task harder actually nukes a lot of these reward hacking methods, right? There are some tasks that are so hard that the only way, well, you could hypothesize that there are some tasks that are so hard that the only way to make progress on them is to do things the right way. And that's a kind of interesting idea to... So I think, if I think about myself going through university, and if I think about, say, what Russell was saying about his kids studying, in some way the worldly reward is actually an obstacle to doing things the right way, right? And it's the existence of some much higher goal for which you can't really compute intermediate steps that are anything other than doing the right thing, that kind of induces you to adopt the right attitude and actually learn things the right way. And that's a little bit sad, because it means that it's very difficult to put those structures in place. It's very difficult to understand how to put in place intermediate goals for people pursuing that kind of very lofty ambition, and it's actually much more painful for people as well, because it's difficult to orient them. It's easy to go through a calculus class, right? You have weekly assignments, you have a grade, you can track your progress on that grade. What I'm sketching on this board is much more like doing a PhD. It's hard to supervise a PhD student, right? But it's much more difficult to kind of do a hacky job, you might think. So this is partly what's behind the second, this is the quote I want to move on to, the second kind of principle you'll find listed on the MetaUni webpage is celebrate purposelessness, which is another way of saying what's on this board, but I'll leave that to the quote I'm about to read. Yeah, any comments on this? So I suppose what I'm saying is that it seems like a good idea to provide feedback, right? What could be bad about feedback? What could be bad about a score? right? And it is good, I think, to keep track of your progress and have numerical guides to what's going on. But it's also a poison, because it's like the opposite of intrinsic motivation to some extent, right? So it's a very dangerous thing, metrics, especially in education. So I think one has to explicitly point this out, and the connection with reward hacking with our agents, and the phenomena around what will happen when they become more capable often reminds me of that aspect of education. Maybe since I just already quoted Zhuangzi, I'll just read this story. This is one of my favorite stories from Zhuangzi. So Zhuangzi was a Chinese philosopher around the 4th century BC. I just get it up. So here's the story. A long time ago, a carpenter was traveling between cities when he came across an oak tree, which was so vast that 1,000 people could stand underneath it. A boat could be carved from each of its major branches. Masses of people came to see it, giving the place a carnival atmosphere. But the carpenter didn't even look at the tree. He just went on his way. His assistant was shocked and said to his master, "Why did you not even glance at it nor stop? I have never seen such a great tree." The master said, "This tree is useless. Make a boat from it and it would sink. Make a coffin and it would rot quickly. Make some furniture and it would fall to pieces. This wood is useless and good for nothing. That is why it has lived so long." That night the tree appeared to the master carpenter in a dream, saying, "What are you comparing to me, calling me useless? A fruit tree? They have only their usefulness to blame for their destruction by people. I, on the other hand, have spent a long time studying to be useless. I have nearly perfected it, and this uselessness is very useful to me. If I had been of use, how could I have grown so vast? Somebody would have cut me down hundreds of years ago for my wood." When the carpenter awoke and told his assistant about his dream, the assistant said, "If that tree wants to be useless, why is it used as the shrine for the spirits of the land? There are constant crowds around it. Isn't that called being useful?" "Hush! Don't say another word," said the master. "The tree happens to be here, so it is an altar. By this it protects itself from harm from those who do not realize it is useless, for were it not an altar, it would run the risk of being chopped down." Like many things in Zhuangzi, I think I did not understand this the first time I read it, and it sort of maybe seems a bit cryptic, but I think it's deeply insightful into the kinds of institutions that last, why they last, what is important in culture, and how things are obfuscated in culture and maybe need to be obfuscated, and how the programs that we're running over centuries or millennia inside our society, why their inscrutability is sometimes a necessary part of their functioning, or why spelling things out is sometimes synonymous with destroying them. And that's all very hard to talk about, and kind of hard to see unless you're sort of in the position to sort of have to engineer it. But yeah, I think this quote I don't know if I could actually spell out what I think is in this quote. I think it's very difficult to say. Maybe I'll spell out a little bit. So I commented on, this is under the heading of Celebrate Purposelessness on the metauni page. And that's to come back to the example of Khan Academy. I mean, not to say that anything went wrong with Khan Academy necessarily, but in the context of what we were discussing earlier, there's a sense in which the purposeless cannot defend itself against the purposeful. And you can see this in universities, right? The things that we maybe value about universities, the the parts that drew us to those places, they're by their nature actually hard to defend. And there's a sense in which even if you were very articulate, even if everybody were very articulate and could say exactly why they value those things and why they're important and spell out the connections between fundamental research and long-term progress and all that, in some sense by playing the game you've already lost. And I think that actually the only way to really preserve that kind of essence is to do what the tree is doing here. So I think there's something kind of very artful about preserving the purposeless in the face of the purposeful, and very difficult. I have another quote from Russell there, but I think we've only got about 10 minutes left, and I don't want to speak the whole time, so I think I'll stop there with reading these quotes and open the floor to anybody who wants to comment on any of this, and thank you very much.
So, I mean, something I'm wondering here, maybe this belongs more in the disruption seminar or AI safety. I don't have kids yet, but if I do end up having kids, then I'm pretty confident that they'll never be able to contribute any economic value, that a large language model can't do better. Like, how do you think about this?
Yeah. I don't know, man. I think about it a lot. It seems to me to have two parts. One is surviving the transition, and the other is preparing for the mode of existence on the other side. So we didn't start homeschooling Russell for these reasons or anything to do with, preparing for the singularity or anything, but it was during COVID that we started. But obviously being homeschooled and given what I know about what's coming, I'm sort of in a position to put him in front of tools and put him in front of experiences that will help him to prepare. That's one part of it. I think appreciating the scope of human activity that will be possible is something important. But in terms of like the survival part, I have no idea. I think my answers to that are not not feel-good answers. There's something like be on the winning side of the war. I don't know. Like stop the AIs and don't be in the losing pile where until society figures out something like UBI is where many people are going to be. But yeah, maybe you can separate out your question. So are you asking like the tactics of like as he's growing up, how to stay in a job with rapid automation, or how does it,
so if you know that there's a good chance that this transition happens within Russell's, before Russell is of the age that he leaves the house, how does it change your approach to homeschooling or education in general?
Yeah, I think I don't have sort of articulated answers. It's something I'm discovering as I do it. So I can tell you what I do, and that's kind of got embedded in it my answer. I think that's the best I can do for now. So what I do with him is, well, the obvious thing is we spend a lot of time not only telling stories, but having involving GPT with the stories. So we have a kind of one of these pockets here at MetaUni where we draw pictures and then that generates stories, and he figures out what kind of stories it tells and sort of has ideas for how to play with that. So there's like an embedding of that's very primitive now, but will be much, much less primitive soon. So, there are many positive sides of what's coming, and the kind of unlocking of infinite depths of beauty and engaging literature on demand to do with whatever you have in mind is one of them. So I want him to see that wonder and, try to put him in front of that. As much of it as I can kind of manage to craft myself. I also want him to be able to learn very rapidly and to make use of these tools to do so. So, he learns, of course I teach him some of what he knows, but he learns from a lot of online tools, and he's got a book club with a bot that I wrote where he discusses books with it, gets quizzes, answers the quizzes. So I want him to be kind of fluent in that sort of the points of leverage. But okay, that's kind of practical things. In terms of, something we've discussed in the Disruption Seminar, which I think is coming for a lot of people, is I think this realization that you just stated matter-of-factly, and I agree with you, I think it's going to just break a lot of people because they identify with their economic value. And when that goes away, they will not adapt to that, just like many people don't adapt to retirement. So I think having a relationship to knowledge and work and the kind of striving we were discussing earlier, where you're pushing yourself and it's not pleasant, but completely 100% decoupled from any utility economically, is the real challenge. And I don't know any other way to motivate that than the kind of things we're discussing here, right? Like a kind of interest in the transcendent, or just appreciation of beauty. His mother reads him lots of Chinese poems, and so on. So you're getting an understanding of that, like without it being driven by some kind of career goal, I suppose is one thing. But that's I don't know the answer.
I'm thinking of Aldous Huxley has The Doors of Perception. He sketches this picture of the actives and the contemplatives. And I don't see any world for us where we're not contemplatives.
What's the distinction between the two?
What action is the so contemplatives, they withdraw from life. They spend their time meditating. These are the monks you see who spend 40 years fasting in the retreat in the limit, and then you have the actives who often get sucked away into the daily grind. You lose a bit of your consciousness, chipping away at the same routine day after day, and the contemplative existence seems like the pretty much the only thing left to human beings after we make this transition, to me at this moment.
What do you think they're contemplating?
Well, hopefully the wonders of singular learning theory. All these other things.
Yeah. I don't know. I think there are pleasures in life that don't depend on being on the frontier of anything. So you can enjoy. Yeah, I mean, I think this is part of what I mean. So you don't want to be Lisa Doll, right? You don't want to be maybe me. I don't know. So where your value is tied up in your contributions on some frontier and the kind of value you derive from feeling yourself at that kind of boundary. I don't want to rob Russell of reaching for that either. I've definitely derived a lot of meaning in my own life from pursuing that, so I don't want to like forestall that. But yeah, I think I kind of agree that there's something a bit sad about just living out your days, learning games to play and knowing you'll never be, the best at them, or so if you can appreciate beauty, and there will be a lot of beauty, but yeah, I think that's not enough. At least it's not enough for me. So maybe we should enjoy the challenge of making this transition survivable, because it's the last challenge we'll get to enjoy.
Amen.
So we should be grateful. Okay. On that note, I think we've hit 4 o'clock, and that's a fun place to stop. So thanks, everybody. That was a lot of fun. I hope if Treeku had some great haiku that you took screenshots, because I didn't get all of them. And yeah, thanks a lot for coming and for making MetaUni the place that it is and is becoming.